Hello there everyone and welcome back to the GSL-English Podcast. My name is Gideon and this is a podcast to help you practice and improve your English in a relaxed and natural way. And in this episode, we are going to talk about silence. Now that's quite an interesting topic to talk about, silence. How can you talk about silence? Well, we're not talking about the silent treatment. We're not talking about just silence in itself. We're going to talk about silence in conversation. Is there a place for silence? Sometimes does silence say more than we might think? And also particularly when we are having a conversation in English, is silence always a bad thing? Okay, so it's an interesting idea this, because I think particularly when we're in a conversation where we're not as comfortable as we normally are, or perhaps we're having a conversation in our second or third language, we have this fear of silence, that there must be no silence, there must be no pauses. But is that really the case? Is there a place for silence? And can we use a little bit of silence to actually improve our speaking skills? So that's the idea. And that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to pick apart in this episode. To pick apart means to examine something closely, to look at it critically in detail. Now, what's your relationship with silence? Do you find it awkward? Do you hate pauses? Do you feel that every pause, every moment of silence should be, filled? Or are you okay with a little bit of silence? Are you someone that doesn't mind a little bit of silence here and there? Personally, I don't mind silence. I'm quite happy to sit with somebody in silence. In fact, I think that sometimes you can bond with somebody, you can have a good time with somebody without actually saying anything. But that's for another topic. So this idea of silence, what is the power of silence? Okay, so that's the first thing we're going to establish. Does silence have any kind of power, particularly when it comes to communication? Have you ever noticed how quick we are to fill the silence in a chat, particularly when we're not too comfortable? Even if we are thinking about what to say, we fill it with ums, buts, and loads of little filler words that don't make sense. Even when no one's asking us to, we feel that we have to fill a silence. We use those filler words like, yeah, totally, right. In English, we say, yeah, no, but yeah, things like that. Do you get what I mean? We do anything to avoid the dreaded pause. In some situations, that's right. If you're in a bit of small talk, sometimes silence can be awkward and you want to try and avoid it. But is silence really the enemy of good conversation? If there's a little bit of silence in a conversation, is that really such a bad thing? Is it a problem every now and then just to be silent in a conversation? Take time to think. Take time to collect your thoughts. And most importantly, take time to listen. Is silence something to be dreaded? If we dread something, we fear it, or we dislike it greatly. We dread it. Like, for example, I dread going to the dentist. I'm terrified of the dentist. It's something I don't want to do. But is it really the enemy of good conversation? And by that we mean, something that harms, something that blocks, something that gets in the way of good communication. Well, I would say that actually it's one of our most powerful tools in communication. A tool is something we use to make a job easier or to complete a task. So when we say that silence is a powerful tool, it's effective. It has useful elements to it. Now, just as a little disclaimer here at this point, I'm not saying that you can quite happily go into a conversation and think, I'm not going to say anything. No, we always make efforts in conversations, but the idea of this is silence now and then okay? And this is particularly a good one if you are, in the process of trying to improve your English speaking skills, and that idea of not knowing what to say, not having anything to say. If we fear that, I hope this episode can help you a little bit. So before we move on, just as a little note, if you are new here, please don't forget to subscribe. I create podcasts like this to help you, as I said in the intro, to improve your English in a relaxed and calm way, but also in an effective way. So I want you to come away from this just feeling chilled out, but hopefully having understood or learnt something about the English language. And if you are a returning viewer or listener on Spotify, you're a legend. I love you. Thanks for coming back. Silence gives weight to our words. When we give weight to something, we give it more importance, and it makes something perhaps more serious, more meaningful. It shows we're listening. It gives others space to feel, to think, and sometimes silence can say more than any well-crafted sentence. And what I mean by that, when we talk about a craft or something that is well-crafted, it is well made, it's carefully made, it's intelligently put together. Sometimes silence can say more. Sometimes words aren't necessary. But also, silence has the power to give what we are going to say more meaning. For example, if somebody asks us an important question, if we come straight out with an answer, well, I think this, my opinion is this, well, blah, 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 blah. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we just take a moment to consider the question, take a pause, have a little bit of silence. What's interesting is when we then come to speak, we've almost built anticipation for what we're going to say. It shows that we've taken time to consider what we are talking about. We've taken time to think about what we are going to talk about. It's a great exercise in business because it gives more gravity to what we are going to say. For example, if in a business meeting someone approaches us and asks an important question, if we just come out with an answer straight away, that might be fine. But if we just have a little bit of pause, a little silence, just to think, and then we continue with our thoughts, silence now gives what we are going to say more power. It builds anticipation. So there's one powerful way we can use silence to give what we are going to say more weight, more gravity, more importance. Silence shows we are listening. We don't have to fill every gap. Sometimes somebody might be telling us a story and they have a little pause or silence in between. Perhaps that's not the time for us to share our anecdote. Perhaps that's not the time for us to jump in and fill the silence. Maybe it's okay. Just give them time to feel, to think, to process what they are going to say. And sometimes, this isn't always the case, but if someone talks to us about something, perhaps a problem or an issue that they're facing, sometimes there are no words. But silence can paint 1,000 words sometimes. Just a silence, a bit of eye contact, a reaffirming smile or facial expression. Sometimes that has the ability to say more than any perfectly crafted sentence or piece of advice. So we're kind of building the idea here that silence, maybe there's a bit of power to it. And maybe it's something that can give, even in our own language, our words more meaning, more depth. So we're going to read a little story now, just about silence and the power of silence. Okay, it's not a true story, but it just kind of brings the idea to communication through silence. Is that possible? Okay, so it's late. Around 2 a.m. Ella is sitting in one of those plastic chairs that never quite fit your back right. She's been there for hours, waiting for news about her father. He'd collapsed earlier that evening. It all happened so fast. So, of course, we've got this girl, Ella. clearly in a hospital. She's sitting on those plastic chairs, the kind of universal worldwide chairs that are just really uncomfortable. You know, the plastic ones you often get at hospitals or doctors and things like that. They never quite fit your back right. So that's where she's sitting. But unfortunately, she's there because her father had collapsed. If we collapse, we suddenly fall down due to an illness, weakness, sometimes without consciousness. So he's in hospital and, you know, everything is happening fast. A nurse checks in now and then, says they are doing everything they can. Across from her sits a man, older, maybe in his 70s, wrinkled coat, hands folded in his lap. He's not crying, not reading, not on his phone, just listening. So the nurse is checking in now and then, occasionally with Ella, you know, just saying, look, we're doing everything we can. We're looking after him. But across from her, it sits an older man. So just kind of imagine the scene. I'm pretty sure all of us have been there at one point. You know, you're in a hospital, very anxiety-inducing time, isn't it? Perhaps there's not many people around, 2 a.m., just the hubbub, the noise of computers and machinery. There's an older man sitting opposite, perhaps in his 70s, got a wrinkled coat, meaning it's not been ironed. It's got folds, it's got creases, and his hands are folded in his laps, you know, just resting calmly in front of his body while he's seated. What's interesting with this older man, he's not doing anything. He's not reading, not crying, not on his phone, just sitting. For almost an hour, neither of them says a word. Then the man finally speaks. Not much, just, "You waiting for someone too?" Ella nods. "My dad," she says. He nods too. And then silence again. So they're sitting opposite each other for, you know, quite some time. They're not talking, they're not communicating, but he just says, you know, "You waiting for someone too?" Ella nods. "My dad." And then he nods back. Silence again. No pep talk, no platitudes, just the quiet understanding that for now, there's nothing to say, and that's okay. No pep talk. A pep talk is kind of like a small speech that is meant to encourage or motivate. A coach of a team might give a pep talk. A business leader managing a team, he might give a pep talk. You know, the idea that a little speech that can just build the morale, the motivation, the encouragement of who you're dealing with. But there's none of that. There's no pep talk. You know, the older man didn't say, "Look, stick with it. You're going to be fine. Everything's going to be okay." No, that probably wouldn't have been the right time to do it. No platitudes. A platitude is overused, unoriginal phrases that sound comforting but mean little. So he didn't just go in with the, "I'm sure everything will be fine," kind of natural answer to that question. "I'm sure it will all be fine." It sounds comforting, but it doesn't mean anything, does it? Because that man doesn't know. He doesn't know anything. So no pep talk, no platitudes, just the quiet understanding, the mutual knowledge or empathy that for now, you know, no words are necessary. But silence is saying everything. And that is okay. Now, what do you think at this point? Because I guess we've all got different personalities, so this is very subjective. You know, for some in that situation, perhaps actually a pep talk would have been the perfect thing. But generally speaking, in that situation, this old man said everything he needed to say in silence, you know, just a little head nod, maybe a little smile. Almost to say, you know, we're in this together. Almost to say it's going to be okay without any words. Are we getting the idea here with the power of silence? That we don't always have to fill voids. We don't always have to share opinions. We don't always have to give advice. Sometimes just a little question and silence. That does all the talking. But something shifted in the silence. They weren't alone anymore. Just two people sharing the same weight. So something shifted, something changed, something moved emotionally or mentally. So before this point, they felt alone. But in that moment, you know, where he said, "You waiting for someone too?" She nods. "My dad." not a lot of words at all, but they knew that from that point, they were no longer alone. So even within that silence, they were connected. They were together. And as it says here, they were just two people sharing the same weight. Sometimes we have a weight on our shoulders, don't we? It's a burden. It's a worry. It's an anxiety. It just weighs on your shoulders. They're sharing the same weight, the same unknowns. They don't know what's going to happen. But now they're connected with it. And it didn't take loads of words to do that. It didn't take loads of small talk. It didn't take loads of pep talks and platitudes. No, just a simple question, a simple answer, and then the silence was enough. Really interesting. So why does silence matter? Well, what this story shows us is that silence isn't a void. A void is an empty space. If you are in a void, there's nothing else in it. Silence isn't always a void. It's a space we share. A kind of emotional breathing room, space to relax, space to process. And for in these two situations, we've got Ella and this elderly man, they've got a lot of processing to do. But it's almost like they're doing it together. They're communicating through silence. And I think we all fall into the habit of we view silence as a void, an empty space. And often with a void, what do we want to do? We want to fill it. Is that always necessary? Is that always the case? Again, perhaps our personality, we would have liked someone just to keep talking with us, to comfort us. But the reality is, words or no words, they were now together in this scenario. And the more comfortable we get with it, so comfortable we get with silence, not bothered with it, doesn't make us feel awkward, the better we become at truly listening, letting others feel heard, letting conversations breathe. I love that point. And it makes me think of red wine. Now, I'm by no means a wine connoisseur at all, or a sommelier. I like a bit of red wine. I don't know anything about it. I think I like a Merlot. I think that's the red wine I like. My wife buys it. I'm not too sure. But what do you do? What are you supposed to do? This is not what I do. But what are you supposed to do when you get a red wine? You might decant it into a larger decanter. Is that the word? And you let it breathe. You give it time to breathe. You don't rush the process. And that way, it just releases the aromas and everything in the wine. You don't go straight in and drink it, generally speaking. Well, here it's this beautiful idea of letting conversations breathe rather than word, to the next opinion, to the next thought, to blah, 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 blah. Having a little moment. So it's almost like the conversation can just aerate. It can just relax a bit. It can breathe. And what this does is it allows for just natural pauses for effect, natural flow. And this might be something that we're hideously uncomfortable with at first, the idea of silence in a conversation. But sometimes it lets conversations breathe. And perhaps if someone's told us a story, I know in conversation, our natural inclination sometimes is to tell another story that we have that is similar. They tell a story about a car, you tell a story about a car you had. Not a problem with that, but maybe just a little moment just to think about what they've said. Think about the story they've told you. Or perhaps someone opens up to you about something. We might have some advice immediately. But how much better would it make that person feel if we just take a moment to just listen, to just process what they said, let that thought breathe, kind of thing. Interesting idea, isn't it? In Japan, they even have a term for it. Now, I apologize if we do have any Japanese listeners, which I did look at the demographic on YouTube and on Spotify. We do have some Japanese listeners, so thank you very much. So the term is ma, M-A. I'm pretty sure that's not how it's pronounced. And it means the space between, okay? Japanese have a term for this kind of silence we're talking about, ma, the space between. It's the silence that gives structure and meaning to sound, much like how a pause can make words hit deeper. So the Japanese have a term. A term is a word or phrase, ma. And the idea of this word, the space between, is that it gives structure. It gives framework and meaning to sounds. And it means that a pause can make words that we say hit just a little bit deeper. They resonate with us. that silence, that ma, that space between, just gives time to process the words that are being put out there. And I kind of love this idea. We are in the habit of quick fire. Everything is quick fire, isn't it? Absolutely everything. But just taking a moment, especially in conversation, to stop rushing. Just listen. Take a moment to pause. So try this. Okay, we could all try this over the next week or so. This week, try embracing silence. Okay? That is accepting and using silence intentionally. So if we're going to have a conversation, if our natural inclination is just to speak straight away, whenever there's an opportunity, if there's an ever so slight void, we fill it. Don't do it. Embrace the silence. Let the pause happen. Don't rush into that void to fill it. You might be surprised what people say, or more, what they don't say. And I think this is a really interesting concept, this idea of silence. It actually just reminded me of that song, The Sound of Silence. Who wrote that? Was it Simon and Garfunkel originally? I might be completely off with that. If anyone knows who wrote The Sound of Silence, please do let me know. Amazingly written song. But yeah, how do you feel about that? That idea of letting silence, that space between, happen. And the reason I like this, the reason this resonates with me, is because I think it takes a little bit of pressure off us when we're in conversation, when we do have to express our thoughts. Even if everybody else around us is just throwing words out there, left, right and centre, pause is all right. A bit of silence is okay. If you're going to talk, if you're going to share your opinion, there is absolutely nothing wrong with taking a moment to collect your thoughts. Taking a moment to just think about what you're going to say. Taking a moment to process the question you've been asked, or process some information that they've told you. There's nothing wrong with that. So maybe that's something we can try over the next week. Embrace silence. When you're having conversations, just take a moment. Let that pause happen. Interesting, isn't it? I just wanted to talk about that because particularly we often, when we're learning a language, I notice it with a lot of learners of English, they get into this habit of feeling that fluency or reaching that C1 level or advanced level is this idea of just throwing words out there as quickly as you can and expressing yourself in so many convoluted ways and using large vocabulary and going around and around a story just because you can. Whereas that is a skill, particularly in storytelling, I don't believe that's true. That is not a mark of fluency. That is not a mark of an advanced speaker. Everything we do with languages is about communication. That is our focus, isn't it? We are focused on communication, communicating with another human. But are we, rushing that? Is our focus in conversation wrong? So I think it takes a bit of pressure of us. And maybe this is you. Maybe you struggle in conversations. You're worried about what to say. You don't always have a lot to say. That's all right. That's okay. Take a pause. Take a moment. That space between. Be okay with it. And yeah, I think when somebody's talking to you about something, or you're talking to someone else about something, and they're looking you in the eye and they're listening and they're not talking, how much better does that make you feel? But the worst thing that can happen is when you're talking to someone, particularly something that from the heart, something that's important to you, and all you can see the whole time is their mouth going, trying to get a word in whilst you're talking. They're not listening. But how much better does it make you feel when someone's just looking at you in the eyes, and once you finish, they just process what you were saying. They process the thought. They take time to consider. It shows that they truly value what you've told them. And if they're going to give any response at all, they want it to be right. And that doesn't mean giving a massively long comment all the time. And if you're a person of minimal words, that's your personality. That's okay. Don't worry about it. We've all got different strengths. We've all got different weaknesses. If you are a more relaxed, shy person in your native language where you're just a good listener and you don't use a lot of words, well, that's your personality. That's not really going to change in another language, but that's okay. We have to let our personality just come out through our English. We're not trying to be someone else. We're not trying to copy someone else's English. And the reality is that is not sustainable. So that's kind of the idea that I wanted to share across in this podcast, that this episode, silence is okay. I'm not talking about making no effort at all, but there's nothing wrong with a pause. There's nothing wrong with just taking a moment to think, pausing before we speak. In fact, in business, it's a brilliant technique to apply gravitas to what you are saying. Gives what you're saying gravity, gives what you're saying a bit more attention. So yeah, be okay with silence every now and then. Yeah. Let me know in the comments. I would really, really love to know, are you okay with silence? Is silence something that you're okay with, or do you absolutely hate it? And is this something that will be challenging for you? And again, I'm kind of not trying to put across the idea here that if you are a more timid person naturally, still make an effort to have a conversation, to ask questions, and don't hold back. If you want to tell a story in detail, go for it. But it's just this idea of being okay with silence. There you go. So, little update on the podcast, just while we're moving on. I know last week I promised that there was going to be an acoustic board here. A very fancy acoustic board. If you're listening on Spotify, I do apologise. This is more for the YouTube world. But there was going to be an acoustic board here that I said I was going to put up this week. As you can see, it didn't happen. This week got really busy. It's still downstairs, lying in my hallway. So possibly next week, but I'm not making any promises anymore. I'm not making any promises. It might be up next week. It might not. And I'll be honest, I don't think you really care. You're not here for the acoustic board. Maybe you are. Maybe you just want to see the acoustic board. I'll try and do it for next week. But I don't know about you, but this year, what is going on? It is flying by. So I'm actually recording this podcast a little later than I had planned. I usually record Friday afternoons. It is now Saturday evening. I wrote this one on Monday, and then I just ran out of time. Went out yesterday, forgot to record, so I'm doing it Saturday evening. But how on earth is it the 1st of June tomorrow? So this podcast comes out on the 1st of June. Where's the first 5 months of this year gone? What on earth has happened? It's like someone's put it on fast forward. It only hit me the other day when I wrote with a pen and paper the date. It was the first time I've actually written pen and paper 2025, which just feels absolutely bizarre to me. But yeah, am I alone in that? Or do you think this year is just flying by? Or am I just getting older and this is part of life where it just speeds up? Let me know. So yeah, well done. Keep going with your English, whatever you're doing. There's brilliant podcasts out there, but I do appreciate your support, your continued support in watching and listening to this podcast. As I said, if you are new here and you've lasted to this point, firstly, very well done. But the idea is I just want you to be able to absorb the English language in a relaxed way, in a chilled way, without too much pressure, and just prepare you to be able to use the language in its most authentic way. All right, there you go. Went into Camden yesterday. Camden in London. Had a great time. Went to the Jazz Cafe. Yeah, very fancy, I know. Went to the Jazz Cafe in London and had an amazing time. So if you are going to London and you want something, you're into your kind of jazz, into your music, check out the Jazz Cafe in Camden. Tickets aren't expensive. And what's awesome is they have this kind of standing section at the bottom. But if you want to be a bit bougie, be a bit fancy, spend a little bit of money, you can book a table and have like dinner whilst watching the jazz band. Brilliant. So yeah, if you're in Camden, I just put a note to say this. Check out the Jazz Cafe. Have a little look before. If there is an event you want to go to, make sure you do book tickets. But Camden is a really lively place to visit in London. The food there is epic. We had some Mexican tacos, and tacos, that sounded American then. Mexican tacos, go back to British, and they were amazing. Absolutely incredible. Highly recommend Camden. highly recommend the Jazz Cafe if you can. All right, you lovely people. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. You know I appreciate it. Have a great week. Don't put too much pressure on yourself with your English. Just be consistent and enjoy it. Have a good one, guys.